The moment I realized I was about to destroy my career, my marriage, and possibly my life, I was standing in a basement laboratory at 3:17 in the morning, staring at a DNA sequencing readout that should have been impossible. My name is Dr. Nathan Price, and for 23 years, I served as a senior forensic geneticist for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. What I discovered in 2019, hidden in the genetic evidence of over 200 missing persons cases spanning 4 decades, was so disturbing that I was given a choice: silence or erasure. I chose silence. But silence has a half-life, and mine has finally decayed. This is the truth they buried, the truth that cost me everything, and the truth that the families of the missing deserve to know. I need to start at the beginning because context matters. In 1996, fresh out of my doctoral program at Johns Hopkins, I joined the FBI's DNA analysis unit at Quantico. Back then, forensic genetics was still in its adolescence. We were just beginning to understand the full potential of what DNA evidence could tell us about crimes, about victims, about perpetrators. I was young, ambitious, and absolutely certain that science would always lead us to the truth. For the first 15 years of my career, that belief held firm. I helped solve hundreds of cases. Cold cases that had haunted investigators for decades suddenly cracked open when we applied new genetic techniques. Families got closure. Killers went to prison. The system worked more or less the way it was supposed to work. I married Sandra in 2003. We had twin daughters in 2007, Emma and Olivia. I was building the life I had always imagined. One where hard work and intellectual honesty were rewarded, where the truth was valued above all else. The first crack in that foundation appeared in the spring of 2017. I was reviewing cold case files for a congressional oversight committee, a routine assignment that involved cataloging unsolved cases where DNA evidence existed but had never been properly analyzed. The backlog was staggering. Thousands of cases sitting in evidence lockers across the country, waiting for resources that never came. My job was to prioritize which cases should move to the front of the queue based on likelihood of solving and public interest. That is when I noticed the pattern. It started with 3 cases from the Pacific Northwest. A hiker who vanished from Mount Rainier National Park in 1984. A camping family of 4 that disappeared without a trace from Olympic National Forest in 1991, a solo backpacker last seen on a trail in the Cascade Range in 2002. All 3 cases had something unusual in common. The search teams had recovered biological evidence, hair samples primarily, and tissue fragments, blood in one case that did not match any known animal in the FBI's extensive genetic database. Now, unidentified biological samples are not particularly unusual in wilderness disappearance cases. Animals scavenge. Hikers encounter wildlife. Evidence gets contaminated. Standard protocol is to flag the unknown samples, run them against databases, and if no match is found, store them for future analysis. These 3 cases had all followed that protocol. The samples had been tested, flagged as unknown primate, and filed away. Unknown primate. I remember reading those words and feeling a small chill run down my spine. The Pacific Northwest has no native primates. Neither does any wilderness area in the continental United States. The obvious explanation was contamination or lab error. Someone had mislabeled a sample from another case. Perhaps evidence from an investigation involving zoo animals or exotic pet trafficking. But something nagged at me. A good scientist develops instincts over years of practice, learns to recognize when data is trying to tell them something they do not want to hear. So I did what any curious researcher would do. I started looking for more cases. What I found kept me awake for the next 3 nights. Using the FBI's Violent Criminal Apprehension Program database, I ran a search for all missing persons cases involving wilderness disappearances where biological evidence had been recovered but not matched to the victim, any known suspect, or any identified animal species. The search parameters covered cases from 1970 to the present day, a span of nearly 50 years. The database returned 217 cases, 217 people who had vanished in remote wilderness areas across the United States, leaving behind biological evidence that our forensic systems could not explain. The geographic distribution was not random. The cases clustered heavily in the Pacific Northwest, with secondary concentrations in the Northern Rockies, the Upper Midwest, and the Appalachian Range. These were areas of deep forest, limited road access, and sparse population, areas where someone or something could remain hidden for decades. I should have reported my findings immediately. Standard protocol for anomalous pattern identification required briefing a supervisor within 48 hours. Instead, I did something that would eventually cost me everything. I started conducting unauthorized analysis on the stored evidence samples. I told myself I was just being thorough, that I wanted to have more data before raising what would inevitably be a controversial issue. But the truth was simpler and more damning. I was curious. I was a scientist who had stumbled onto something genuinely unexplained, and I wanted to be the one to explain it. Over the next several months, working nights and weekends, I retrieved samples from 14 of the 217 cases and subjected them to comprehensive genetic analysis. The results were consistent across all 14. The biological material showed DNA markers that were clearly primate in origin, sharing significant genetic overlap with humans and great apes, but with consistent divergence patterns that did not match any known species. The unknown primate was real. It was not contamination. It was not lab error. Something was leaving genetic evidence at sites where humans disappeared, and that something was biologically impossible according to everything modern science claimed to know about North American wildlife. I remember the exact moment I finally accepted what I was looking at. It was a Tuesday evening in November of 2018. I was alone in the lab, staring at a phylogenetic tree I had constructed from the accumulated data. The DNA sequences formed their own distinct branch, positioned between humans and the other great apes, but clearly separate from both. The divergence time, based on molecular clock calculations, suggested a split from the human lineage approximately 200,000 years ago. 200,000 years. A parallel evolution, a species of intelligent primate that had somehow survived in North America without detection for longer than modern humans had existed. I sat in that empty lab for over an hour, just staring at the screen. Then I did what I should have done months earlier. I called my supervisor. Director Margaret Chen was not pleased to receive a call at 9:30 on a Tuesday night. She was even less pleased when I explained why I was calling. I remember her exact words. "Nathan, do you understand what you are saying? Do you understand the implications?" I told her I understood the science. She told me to come to her office first thing in the morning and to not speak to anyone else about this in the meantime. That meeting the next morning was the beginning of the end. Chen had clearly not slept. Her office, normally immaculate, showed signs of an all-night research session. Papers and files were stacked on her desk. Her computer displayed multiple open windows, and her expression held something I had never seen in her before. Fear. "Sit down, Nathan," she said. "I need to show you something." What she showed me over the next 2 hours fundamentally altered my understanding of the organization I had served for over 2 decades. The FBI had known about the pattern I discovered since 1978. A senior analyst named Dr. Harold Vance had identified it during a review of missing persons cases, and conducted analysis almost identical to mine. His findings were classified under national security protocols, his research destroyed, and Dr. Vance himself transferred to a desk position where he spent the remaining 12 years of his career processing routine paperwork. He died in 1992, Chen told me, heart attack. He never spoke publicly about what he found. And neither will you, Nathan, neither will you. I wish I could tell you I stood up to her, that I demanded transparency, insisted on scientific integrity, refused to be silenced. But I had a wife and 2 daughters. I had a career I had spent decades building, and Chen was making it very clear that my continued freedom depended on my cooperation. The official policy, she explained, had been established at the highest levels of government. The existence of an unidentified primate species in North America, one potentially intelligent enough to successfully avoid detection while somehow being connected to hundreds of human disappearances, was considered a matter of national security. Public disclosure would cause panic, undermine trust in wilderness recreation industries worth billions of dollars, and potentially trigger vigilante hunting expeditions that could escalate into uncontrolled violence. In other words, the truth was too dangerous to tell. For the next year, I played the role they assigned me. I conducted normal forensic analysis during the day, came home to my family at night, and tried desperately to pretend that I had not discovered something that haunted my every waking moment. But secrets have weight. They accumulate like sediment, building pressure until something cracks. My marriage began to crumble first. Sandra could sense that something was wrong, that I was carrying a burden I would not share. Our conversations became superficial, our intimacy mechanical. The twins noticed too. Daddy seemed sad, Emma told her mother one night, thinking I could not hear. Why is Daddy always sad? I started drinking more than I should have, started taking longer routes home from work so I could have time alone in my car, time to think about what I knew and what I was being forced to conceal. I became obsessed with the 217 cases, memorizing details about victims, studying maps of disappearance locations, trying to understand the pattern that connected them all. The victims ranged in age from 6 to 73, men and women, experienced outdoorsmen and novice hikers, families and solo travelers. They had vanished from locations spanning from the forests of Maine to the rainforests of Washington state, from the swamps of Florida to the mountains of Montana. Some had left behind equipment, clothing, vehicles. Others had simply walked into the wilderness and ceased to exist. The common thread beyond the anomalous DNA evidence was that their remains were almost never found. In the few cases where human biological material was recovered, it was fragmentary. A bone here, tissue there. Nothing that could explain what had happened to these people. Nothing that provided closure to the families left behind. I started reaching out to those families discreetly at first, calling under the pretense of routine case reviews, asking questions about the circumstances of disappearances, listening to stories of grief that had calcified over years and decades. What I heard broke my heart. There was Margaret Collins, whose husband Robert had vanished while hunting elk in Wyoming in 1986. 33 years later, she still kept his clothes in the closet, still hoped that someday someone would knock on her door with answers. There was the Whitfield family, who had lost their 19-year-old son David during a camping trip in northern Minnesota in 2005. His parents had divorced 2 years later, unable to bear the weight of their shared loss, unable to look at each other without seeing their missing child. There was Elena Vasquez, whose sister Maria had disappeared while hiking the Appalachian Trail in 2012. Elena had quit her job and spent 3 years personally searching every mile of trail near where Maria was last seen, finding nothing, destroying her health and her finances in the process. These were not just case numbers in a database. These were human beings whose lives had been shattered by the unknown, who deserved answers that I possessed but was forbidden to share. The breaking point came in March of 2019. I received a call from a detective in rural Washington state named James Brennan. He was working a recent case, a family of 3 who had vanished during a day hike in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest just 6 weeks earlier. A father, mother, and their 8-year-old daughter, gone without a trace from a well-marked trail less than 2 miles from a popular campground. Detective Brennan had found something unusual at the scene. Hair samples that did not match any of the victims. Tissue fragments with an unusual genetic profile. He was calling to see if the FBI could assist with analysis. I listened to him describe the evidence, and I felt something shift inside me. This was not a cold case from 40 years ago. This was a family that had vanished 6 weeks earlier. A family with relatives who were right now clinging to hope, organizing search parties, pleading on the news for any information that might help find their loved ones. And I knew with absolute certainty that those relatives would never see their family again. I knew because I had studied 217 cases just like this one. I knew the pattern, I knew the outcome, and I knew that by keeping silent, I was complicit in their suffering. Dr. Brennan, I said carefully, I need to ask you something. The hair samples you found, have you had them analyzed yet? Not fully. The local lab said the genetic profile was unusual. They suggested sending it to Quantico for more comprehensive analysis. I want you to listen to me very carefully. I took a breath, knowing I was about to cross a line I could never uncross. Do not send those samples to Quantico. Do not enter them into any federal database, and do not, under any circumstances, let anyone from a federal agency tell you that this case is being handled at a higher level. There was silence on the other end of the line. Dr. Price, are you suggesting? I am suggesting that there are things about cases like this that certain agencies prefer to keep buried. I am suggesting that if you want the truth about what happened to that family, you are not going to find it by following official channels. I gave him my personal cell phone number. I told him to contact me if he wanted to know more. Then I hung up and sat in my office, hands trembling, knowing that I had just set something in motion that I could not stop. 3 days later, Detective Brennan called back. He had done his own research into missing persons cases in his region. He had found the same pattern I had identified years earlier. Unknown biological evidence, victims who vanished without explanation, cases that seemed to fall into a black hole once federal agencies got involved. He wanted to meet. I should have said no. I should have walked away, protected my family, preserved what remained of my career. But I thought about the Collins family, about the Whitfields, about Elena Vasquez and all the others who had spent years drowning in uncertainty. I thought about the 8-year-old girl who had vanished 6 weeks earlier, whose grandparents were probably right now sitting by a phone that would never ring with good news. I agreed to the meeting. We met at a diner in Tacoma on a Saturday afternoon. 2 men hunched over coffee, speaking in voices low enough that nearby tables could not hear. I told Brennan everything, the pattern I had discovered, the genetic evidence, the government suppression, everything except the specific details that might allow him to identify the classified files. His reaction was not what I expected. Instead of shock or disbelief, he nodded slowly, as if I was confirming something he had already suspected. I have been a cop in these woods for 22 years, he said. You are not the first person to tell me something like this. The old-timers, the ones who have been here for decades, they have stories, things they have seen that they do not put in official reports, animals that do not behave like animals, sounds in the forest that do not match any known wildlife. He leaned closer. A few years back, we had a hunter go missing near Mount St. Helens. Search dogs tracked his scent to a ravine, then lost it completely, like he had just vanished into thin air. But at the edge of that ravine, we found something. Footprints. Huge footprints in a bipedal pattern, leading away from the area where the scent disappeared. We photographed them, documented them, called in the experts, and you know what happened? Nothing. The photos disappeared from our files. The expert reports never materialized. We were told it was probably a bear walking on its hind legs, which is not something bears do for extended distances, and the case was closed. How many times has this happened? I asked. More than anyone wants to admit. The people who spend real time in these forests, the indigenous communities, the long-term residents, they know something is out there. They have always known. But trying to get anyone official to acknowledge it is like screaming into a void. That conversation changed everything. For the first time since discovering the pattern, I did not feel alone. Here was someone else who had seen the evidence, someone else who was willing to question the official narrative, someone else who cared more about truth than institutional protection. We began collaborating in secret. Brennan had contacts with law enforcement agencies throughout the Pacific Northwest, people who shared his suspicions but had been similarly stonewalled when they tried to pursue answers. I had access to genetic analysis capabilities and forensic expertise. Together, we started building a shadow case file, documenting every anomalous incident we could find, cross-referencing evidence, mapping locations and timelines. What emerged from that work was more disturbing than anything I had imagined. The 217 cases I had originally identified were just the beginning. When we expanded our search to include reports that had been dismissed, witnesses who had been ignored, evidence that had been suppressed, the number grew exponentially. By our estimate, there were between 400 and 500 disappearances over the past 50 years that showed the characteristic markers of what we had come to call non-human predation. 500 people, 500 families destroyed, 500 lives erased while agencies like mine maintained official silence. We also began to identify patterns within the pattern. The disappearances were not random. They clustered at certain times of year, primarily late spring and early fall. They showed geographic concentration in areas with specific characteristics: old growth forest, limited human access, elevation between 3,000 and 7,000 feet. And perhaps most disturbingly, the frequency was increasing. In the 1970s, we identified an average of 5 cases per year. In the 2000s, that number had risen to 12. By the 2010s, it was approaching 20. Whatever was taking these people was becoming more active, more bold, or perhaps more desperate. In June of 2019, we had our breakthrough. Brennan had maintained contact with the family of the recently missing hikers, the father, mother, and daughter who had vanished from Gifford-Pinchot National Forest. The grandmother, a woman named Ruth Henderson, had refused to accept the official verdict that her family had simply gotten lost and perished in the wilderness. She had hired private investigators, contacted journalists, done everything in her power to keep the case alive. One of those efforts had paid off in an unexpected way. A wildlife biologist conducting unrelated research in the area had discovered something and brought it to Ruth Henderson, rather than to law enforcement. It was a cave hidden in a ravine about 3 miles from where the family had disappeared. And inside that cave was evidence that defied explanation. Ruth contacted Detective Brennan. Brennan contacted me. And 48 hours later, the 3 of us were standing at the mouth of that cave, preparing to document what we found. The entrance was narrow, barely wide enough for a grown man to squeeze through. The rock formation that concealed it was unremarkable. the kind of feature hikers walked past without a second glance. But once inside, the space opened up into a chamber roughly 30 feet wide and 12 feet tall, with passages leading deeper into the mountain. What we found in that chamber will stay with me until the day I die. The floor was scattered with belongings, backpacks, clothing, camping equipment, personal items, dozens of them, accumulated over what appeared to be many years. Some were modern, the kind of high-tech gear you might find at an REI store. Others were decades old, canvas and leather equipment from an era before synthetic fabrics. All of it was damaged, torn, or shattered, bearing marks that looked like they had been made by something with tremendous strength. And among the belongings, scattered throughout the chamber, were bones. Human bones, skulls, femurs, vertebrae, ribs, some complete, most fragmentary. Many showed evidence of trauma, breaks, and fractures that had occurred around the time of death. Others showed signs of having been gnawed, marked by teeth that left patterns unlike any animal I had ever encountered in my forensic work. Ruth Henderson collapsed to her knees when she saw them. I heard a sound come from her throat, a low keening that seemed to contain decades of suppressed grief, finally given voice. These were not just anonymous victims. Somewhere in this charnel house were the remains of her son, her daughter-in-law, her granddaughter. We spent hours in that cave, documenting everything. Photographs, measurements, careful collection of samples for DNA analysis. We recovered belongings that could be traced to specific missing persons cases, items with names, identification, personal photographs. Each one represented a human being who had been loved, who had been missed, whose family had never known what happened to them. Among the items we found was a leather journal that had belonged to a man named William Carver, who had disappeared while prospecting in these mountains in 1964. The journal documented his final days, his growing awareness that something was watching him, his attempts to fortify his camp against what he called the shadows in the trees. The last entry, dated October 17, 1964, read simply, "They are outside. God help me." We also found more recent items, a smartphone that, remarkably, still held a charge when we tested it. The phone belonged to a college student named Sarah Mitchell, who had vanished during a solo hiking trip in 2016. Her parents had never stopped searching for her. Her face was still on missing persons posters throughout the region. The phone contained photographs from her final day, normal hiking shots at first, scenic views and selfies with mountain backdrops. But the later images showed something else, shapes in the trees at the edge of the frame, dark figures that did not look like shadows or wildlife. The final photograph, taken at 6:47 in the evening, according to the metadata, showed nothing but blur and motion, as if the phone had been dropped or knocked from her hands while still recording. As we prepared to leave the cave, Detective Brennan discovered one more thing, a passage leading deeper into the mountain, partially concealed behind fallen rocks. We debated whether to explore it, weighing scientific curiosity against the very real danger of what we might encounter. In the end, caution prevailed. We marked the location, documented what we could from the entrance, and made the difficult decision to withdraw and seek backup before venturing further. That decision probably saved our lives. We were halfway down the ravine, maybe a quarter mile from where we had parked, when Brennan suddenly stopped and held up his hand. I froze, trying to hear whatever had caught his attention. At first, there was nothing but forest sounds, wind in the trees, birds calling in the distance, the normal ambient noise of wilderness. Then I heard it, a sound that did not belong, a rhythmic crashing like something large moving through the underbrush with no concern for stealth, coming toward us, coming fast. "Run," Brennan whispered. "Run now." We ran, not the controlled jog of people who want to create distance while maintaining awareness. We ran like prey animals who have just caught the scent of a predator. All caution abandoned, pure survival instinct taking over. Behind us, the crashing grew louder, closer. I could hear branches breaking, rocks being displaced, and underneath it all, a sound that still haunts my nightmares. Breathing. Deep, heavy, rhythmic breathing, like nothing I had ever heard from any animal. Ruth Henderson was 67 years old. She could not keep pace with us. I heard her cry out behind me, heard her stumble, and for one terrible moment I had to make a choice. Keep running and maybe survive, or stop and help her and probably die. I stopped, turned back, saw Ruth on the ground, her ankle twisted, her face white with terror, and saw, maybe 50 yards behind her, emerging from the tree line, a shape that my mind simply could not process. It was massive, 8 feet tall at least, maybe more, covered in dark hair that matted against a body of impossible muscular density. Its arms hung nearly to its knees, ending in hands that looked capable of tearing a human being apart with casual ease. And its face was something I see every time I close my eyes. Almost human, but fundamentally wrong. Features twisted into an expression of what I can only describe as calculated malevolence. It saw us. Our eyes met across that distance, and I understood with absolute certainty that I was looking at intelligence. This was not an animal acting on instinct. This was a being that understood exactly what it was doing. A being that had been taking people from these forests for decades. A being that had just discovered its secret had been compromised. What happened next saved our lives, though I still do not fully understand it. The creature took one step toward us, then it stopped. Its head turned, almost mechanically, toward something in the forest to its left. It made a sound, a vocalization that was neither human nor animal, something like a bark mixed with a word. And from the trees around us, answering calls came back. Multiple voices, multiple creatures. We were surrounded. They had been herding us. But instead of attacking, the creature in front of us took a step backward, then another. The calls from the forest changed in tone, becoming almost questioning. And then, as suddenly as they had appeared, they were gone. The sounds of movement faded. The forest returned to its normal quiet. We did not wait to understand why we had been spared. I helped Ruth to her feet, and we limped as fast as we could toward the road. Brennan had his weapon drawn, though we all knew it would be useless against what we had seen. We made it to the vehicle, piled in, and drove without stopping until we reached civilization. None of us spoke during that drive. There are no words for what we had experienced, no framework for processing an encounter with something that every authority insisted could not exist. That night, in a motel room in Tacoma, I made the most difficult decision of my life. I had evidence, DNA samples from the cave, photographs of the belongings, the bones, the chamber itself, video footage that Brennan had captured on his body cam. I had the testimony of 3 witnesses, one of them a veteran law enforcement officer with an unblemished record. I could go public. I could blow the whistle on 20 years of government suppression, reveal the truth about what was happening in America's wildernesses, force accountability for 500 families who had been lied to and abandoned. Or I could protect my family, because I understood now why the government had chosen suppression over disclosure. This was not a cover-up motivated by incompetence or indifference. This was calculated self-preservation. Whatever these creatures were, wherever they had come from, they had been successfully avoiding detection for centuries. They were intelligent, organized, and clearly capable of extreme violence. Revealing their existence would not lead to their elimination. It would lead to chaos, to panic, to hunting expeditions that would provoke retaliation against the very populations they were supposed to protect. The government was not hiding monsters to protect the monsters. They were hiding monsters to protect us. But that protection came at a terrible cost. families destroyed by uncertainty, victims whose stories would never be told, a truth buried under decades of official lies. I thought about Sandra, about Emma and Olivia. I thought about what would happen to them if I went public, the scrutiny, the danger, the inevitable retaliation from agencies that had already demonstrated their willingness to destroy careers and lives to maintain their secrets. And I thought about Ruth Henderson sitting in the bed across from mine, her ankle wrapped in an ice pack, her eyes staring at nothing. "Dr. Price," she said quietly, "my family is in that cave. My son, my granddaughter, they have been in that cave for months and I did not know. I thought maybe they were lost, maybe hurt somewhere, waiting for rescue. But they have been dead this whole time, dead and collected like trophies." She turned to look at me. How many others? How many families are out there right now, hoping and praying, not knowing that the people they love are already gone? How many of them will spend the rest of their lives waiting for answers that will never come? I did not have an answer for her. I still do not. But I made my decision. I would not go public. I could not risk my family, could not risk triggering the very chaos that the suppression was designed to prevent. But I would not simply accept silence either. I would document everything, every case, every piece of evidence, every connection and pattern. I would create a complete record of what I had discovered, and I would hide it where the agencies could not find it. And someday when circumstances changed, when the world was ready, that record would come to light. Ruth Henderson agreed to help. So did Detective Brennan. Over the next several months, working in secret, we compiled the most comprehensive documentation of the phenomenon ever assembled. 237 confirmed cases, genetic evidence from 14 separate incidents, witness testimony, photographic documentation. Everything organized, cross-referenced, and stored in multiple secure locations. Then, in November of 2019, the FBI discovered what we had been doing. I still do not know how they found out. Maybe someone talked. Maybe one of the secure locations was not as secure as we believed. Maybe they had been watching us from the beginning, waiting to see how far we would go before they intervened. It does not matter now. What matters is what happened next. The call came at 6:14 in the morning on November 12th, 2019. I was in my kitchen drinking coffee, watching Emma and Olivia eat breakfast before school. Sandra was upstairs getting ready for work. It was the most ordinary morning imaginable, the kind of morning I had taken for granted for years. My phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I did not recognize, a Washington, D.C. area code, followed by an extension that made my stomach drop. I knew that format. I had seen it on classified documents, on internal memoranda, on communications that were never supposed to leave secure facilities. I answered. "Dr. Price," said a voice I did not recognize. Male, calm, utterly devoid of emotion. "You need to come to the Hoover building immediately. Do not speak to your family about why. Do not contact anyone. Do not bring any electronic devices except your bureau-issued phone. A car will be waiting outside your residence in 15 minutes. The line went dead before I could respond. I looked at my daughters still eating their cereal, arguing about something that had happened at school the day before. I looked at Sandra, who had just come downstairs asking me if I wanted more coffee. I looked at my life, the life I had built over decades, and I understood that I was seeing it for the last time. I told Sandra I had been called in for an emergency. I kissed my daughters goodbye, holding them a moment longer than usual, breathing in the scent of their shampoo, memorizing the feeling of their small arms around my neck. Then I walked out the front door, got into the black SUV that was waiting at the curb, and I never went home again. Not really. not as the same man who had left that morning. The drive to Washington took 3 hours. The men in the car with me did not speak. They did not answer questions. They simply drove, their faces as expressionless as the voice on the phone had been. I watched the familiar landscape of suburban Virginia slide past the tinted windows and tried to imagine what was waiting for me at the end of this journey. I had broken the rules. I had violated my oath. I had threatened a secret that powerful people had spent decades protecting. There would be consequences. When we arrived at the Hoover Building, I was not taken to the main entrance. Instead, the SUV descended into an underground parking structure I had never known existed. Through security checkpoints that required biometric verification I did not possess, but which somehow opened for me anyway. We stopped in front of an elevator that had no floor indicators, no buttons, nothing but a smooth metal door that slid open as we approached. The elevator descended for what felt like a very long time. I counted seconds in my head, trying to estimate how far below ground we were going. 50 feet, 100 feet, maybe more. When the doors finally opened, I found myself in a corridor that looked nothing like any FBI facility I had ever seen. The walls were bare concrete, unpainted, utilitarian. The lighting was harsh and clinical, the kind of fluorescent glare that makes everyone look sick. Armed guards stood at intervals, their weapons not the standard issue sidearms of bureau security, but military-grade hardware that had no business being in a law enforcement facility. They watched me pass with eyes that held no curiosity, no judgment, nothing but the flat alertness of men trained to respond to threats. I was escorted to a room at the end of the corridor. Inside, sitting at a metal table bolted to the floor, was Director Chen. She looked like she had aged a decade since I had last seen her. Her face was drawn, her eyes hollow, and her normally immaculate suit was wrinkled as if she had slept in it. When she looked at me, I saw something I had never expected to see in Margaret Chen. Pity. "Sit down, Nathan," she said. "We need to talk about what happens now." What happened now was simple, presented with the clinical precision of a legal document. I was given a choice between two futures, neither of them good. Option 1. I could sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement covering everything I had discovered, everything I had documented, everything I had shared with Detective Brennan and Ruth Henderson. I would surrender all materials related to my unauthorized investigation, including the DNA samples, the photographs, the video footage, the case files we had compiled. I would submit to ongoing monitoring for the remainder of my life, regular check-ins with federal handlers who would ensure I was maintaining my silence. I would accept immediate termination from the FBI with forfeiture of pension and benefits, 23 years of service erased as if it had never happened. In exchange, I would not be prosecuted. I would retain my freedom, and my family would be left alone. Option 2, I could refuse, in which case I would be charged under the Espionage Act for unauthorized disclosure of classified national security information. I would be tried in a closed court with no public record, no jury of my peers, no opportunity to present my case to anyone outside the system that was prosecuting me. I would be convicted because they had more than enough evidence to ensure that outcome, and I would spend the rest of my life in a federal facility where no one would ever hear from me again. My family would be investigated. Sandra would lose her security clearance and her job. My daughters would grow up with their father in prison, branded as a traitor to his country. There was no option 3. There was no whistleblower protection for what I had discovered, no path to public disclosure that would not destroy everyone I loved. There was no cavalry coming to rescue me, no journalist brave enough to publish what I knew, no court that would hear my case without the government controlling every aspect of the proceedings. I had challenged a system that had been protecting its secrets for half a century, and the system had won. I signed the agreement. The pen felt heavy in my hand. The signature I had written thousands of times suddenly foreign and strange. I watched the ink dry on the paper and understood that I was signing away not just my career, but my identity. Everything I had believed about myself, about my work, about the system I had served, all of it was being erased with a single stroke. What happened to Brennan? I asked after the papers were processed. What happened to Ruth Henderson? Chen's expression did not change. Detective Brennan resigned from the Washington State Police last week. He has accepted a private security position in Arizona, far from the forests where he spent his career. He will not be returning to law enforcement. And Ruth? Mrs. Henderson passed away 3 days ago. Heart failure. She was 67 years old and had recently experienced significant stress related to her family situation. I understood what she was telling me. Brennan had been given the same choice I had, silence or destruction, and he had made the same calculation. Ruth Henderson, who had no career to threaten, no family to leverage, no future to protect, had been dealt with differently. Her death was not an accident, it was a message. You killed her, I said. Mrs. Henderson died of natural causes, Chen replied, her voice flat and rehearsed. Her medical records are quite clear on that point. She had a pre-existing cardiac condition that was exacerbated by recent trauma. These things happen, especially to elderly women who have lost family members under difficult circumstances. She held my gaze for a long moment, and I saw the warning in her eyes. Ruth Henderson had pushed too hard, asked too many questions, contacted too many journalists and investigators. She had become a liability, and liabilities were eliminated. That was how the system worked. That was what I had agreed to become part of by signing that document. Nathan, I want you to understand something. Chen leaned forward, her voice softening slightly, taking on an almost maternal tone that was more frightening than her earlier coldness. What you discovered is real. The threat is real. The suppression is not about protecting bureaucratic interests or avoiding embarrassment. It is about preventing a catastrophe that could cost thousands of lives, perhaps millions. She stood and walked to a cabinet against the wall, retrieving a thick folder marked with classification stamps I had never seen before, levels of secrecy that apparently existed above anything I had encountered in my 2 decades with the Bureau. She placed the folder on the table between us. This is everything we know, she said. Not everything we suspect or theorize, but everything we have confirmed through direct observation, scientific analysis, and first-hand experience. I am showing you this because I want you to understand why we do what we do, why the suppression is necessary, why people like Ruth Henderson are acceptable losses in a larger calculation. I opened the folder. The first document was a report from 1947, predating the FBI's official involvement by 3 decades. It described an incident in the mountains of Northern California, where a logging operation had inadvertently cleared a section of old-growth forest that served as a migratory corridor for what the report called unidentified hominids. Within 2 weeks of the clearing, 7 loggers had vanished from the work site. Search parties were organized, but instead of finding the missing men, 3 more searchers disappeared. The operation was suspended. The logging company brought in armed guards from San Francisco, men with military experience and heavy weapons. What happened next was documented in clinical detail that made my stomach turn. The guards reported being stalked through the forest for 3 days. They heard vocalizations that sounded almost like language, coordinated calls moving around their perimeter. On the 3rd night, something attacked the camp. The report described creatures approximately 8 feet tall, covered in dark hair, moving with terrifying speed and coordination. 7 of the 12 guards were killed in the initial assault. The remaining 5 fled, and only 2 made it back to civilization. The logging company abandoned the operation entirely and sold the land to the federal government at a significant loss. The entire incident was classified under national security protocols that did not officially exist at the time. The second document was from 1963. A team of biologists from the Smithsonian Institution, working on a legitimate wildlife survey in the Cascade Range, had encountered something that defied their training and experience. Their field notes described a creature at least 8 feet tall, covered in dark hair, watching them from a distance of approximately 50 yards. When they attempted to approach for closer observation, as any scientist would, the creature vocalized in a way that the lead biologist described as almost linguistic, a complex series of sounds that seemed to carry meaning. Other creatures responded from the surrounding forest, at least 4 additional voices by the team's count. The biologists retreated to their camp. That night, their equipment was systematically destroyed. Cameras, recording devices, sample containers, all of it was torn apart with what the report described as deliberate precision, while the team huddled in their tents, listening to movement all around them. They were not attacked. They were warned. The team abandoned their survey the next morning. Within 48 hours of returning to civilization, all notes, photographs, and samples were confiscated by federal agents who identified themselves only as representatives of an interagency task force. The biologists were interviewed extensively, given very clear instructions about what they had and had not seen, and reassigned to unrelated projects in different parts of the country. The third document was from 1981, and it changed everything I thought I understood about the scope of the suppression. It was a memorandum from the Director of Central Intelligence to the National Security Council. The subject line read simply, "Sasquatch Protocol, Status Update." The memorandum was 27 pages long, and every page revealed new depths of the conspiracy I had stumbled into. The United States government had been aware of these creatures since at least 1942, when military personnel conducting training exercises in the Pacific Northwest began reporting encounters that matched historical descriptions of Bigfoot, Sasquatch, and similar entities from indigenous folklore. Initial responses had been dismissive, attributing the reports to stress, alcohol, misidentification of known wildlife. But the reports kept coming, consistent in their details, impossible to explain away. A classified research program had been established in 1946, with participation from the FBI, CIA, OSS, later NSA, and Department of Defense. The program had been given a variety of code names over the years: Timber Survey, Forest Watch, Wildlife Assessment, innocuous titles designed to attract no attention. Funding was buried in black budgets that Congress never reviewed. Personnel were selected for their discretion, their isolation, their willingness to accept that some truths were too dangerous for public consumption. The program had concluded, after decades of observation, specimen collection, and analysis, that the creatures represented a parallel branch of hominid evolution. They were not apes. They were not humans. They were something else entirely, a species that had diverged from our common ancestors approximately 200,000 years ago and had survived in North America by developing extreme avoidance behaviors and what the memorandum described as organized territorial defense. The population was estimated at between 800 and 1,200 individuals, distributed across remote wilderness areas from Alaska to Northern California, with smaller populations in the Rocky Mountains, Great Lakes region, and Appalachian Range. They lived in small family groups, communicated through a complex system of vocalizations that researchers believed constituted a genuine language, and demonstrated tool use, coordinated hunting strategies, and what appeared to be cultural transmission of knowledge across generations. Most significantly, they had learned to avoid human detection with remarkable effectiveness. Their avoidance behaviors were not instinctive, they were strategic. They understood human technology, human patterns of movement, human investigative methods. They knew when they were being watched. They knew how to disappear. The memorandum recommended continued suppression of all information related to the creatures, citing three primary justifications. First, public disclosure would trigger widespread panic and demands for military intervention. The American public would not accept the existence of large, dangerous predators in wilderness areas that were marketed as recreational destinations. They would demand action. They would demand that the creatures be captured, killed, or forcibly relocated, and any attempt to do so would provoke violent retaliation. The creatures had demonstrated the ability to track, ambush, and eliminate organized groups of armed humans with minimal casualties on their side. They knew the terrain. They could see in the dark. They were faster, stronger, and more patient than any human force that might be sent against them. Open warfare would result in significant loss of human life, possibly catastrophic loss, with no guarantee of success. Second, acknowledgement of a parallel sentient species would raise profound legal and ethical questions about land rights, resource allocation, and the moral status of non-human intelligence. The wilderness areas these creatures occupied included some of the most valuable timber, mineral, and recreational land in the country. Multiple industries depended on access to that land. Granting the creatures any form of recognized status, any legal standing, any territorial rights would have enormous economic implications. Trillions of dollars over time. Entire industries disrupted. Rural economies destroyed. Third, and this was the part that made my blood run cold, the creatures had made it clear through their behavior that they preferred the current arrangement. The disappearances that occurred each year, while tragic for the families involved, represented a relatively small number compared to the total population of wilderness users. Millions of people hiked, camped, hunted, and fished in areas where these creatures were active. The vast majority returned home safely. The creatures were taking only enough humans to maintain their territorial boundaries and provide resources primarily in remote areas where the disappearances could be attributed to natural causes. Getting lost, falling, drowning, animal attacks. As long as humans did not threaten their core territories, did not push too deep into the old growth forests they called home, the creatures would continue to operate with relative restraint. The equilibrium was stable. The casualties were acceptable. In essence, the government had made a deal with the devil. A certain number of human lives would be sacrificed each year in exchange for avoiding a conflict that could cost far more. The families of the victims were collateral damage in a cold calculation that valued stability over truth, economic interests over individual lives, the illusion of safety over the reality of danger. I looked up from the folder. Chen was watching me with an expression I could not read. "Now you understand," she said. "This is not about incompetence or bureaucratic inertia. This is not about protecting careers or avoiding embarrassment. This is about managing an existential threat with limited options. The creatures cannot be eliminated. They cannot be contained. They cannot be negotiated with in any meaningful sense. They can only be accommodated, and accommodation requires secrecy." "How many?" I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "How many people have died since this started?" Chen's expression flickered, something that might have been pain quickly suppressed behind professional composure. "Our best estimate is between 1,500 and 2,000 confirmed disappearances attributable to the creatures since 1942. That does not include suspected cases where evidence was insufficient for classification," or cases that occurred before our monitoring systems were established. The real number is almost certainly higher, 1,500 to 2,000 people, over nearly 8 decades. Families destroyed, lives erased, all to maintain a secret that protected an arrangement most Americans would find monstrous if they knew it existed. All those missing person posters, all those tearful pleas on the evening news, all those search parties that found nothing because there was nothing to find. The victims were not lost in the wilderness. They had been taken, collected, consumed. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the folder across the room, overturn the table, demand accountability for every single one of those deaths. But I was exhausted, I was broken, and I knew deep down that Chen was right about at least part of it. Revealing the truth would not save anyone. It would not bring back the dead. It would only create more victims, more chaos, more death. The system had won. The system always won. I left the Hoover Building that afternoon a free man. Technically, I had signed the agreement. I had surrendered the evidence. I had agreed to the monitoring, the silence, the erasure of everything I had worked for. I would not be prosecuted. I would not go to prison. I would be allowed to return to my life, or whatever remained of it. But I was not the same person who had walked in that morning. Something fundamental had been taken from me. Not just my career or my sense of purpose, but my belief in the possibility of justice. The system I had served for 23 years was not broken. It was working exactly as designed. And its design required the sacrifice of innocent people to maintain a stability that benefited everyone except the victims. The divorce came 18 months later. Sandra could tell something had changed, could feel the distance I maintained even in our most intimate moments. She would reach for me in bed and feel me flinch away. She would ask about my day and receive monosyllabic responses that conveyed nothing. She begged me to tell her what was wrong, to let her help carry whatever burden I was carrying, but I could not risk her safety. I could not make her complicit in knowledge that might get her killed. Ruth Henderson had died because she knew too much and would not stop talking. I would not let the same thing happen to Sandra. We separated in the spring of 2021. She took the girls to her mother's house in Connecticut, far from the forests where I had discovered the truth. I moved to Vermont, to a small town where no one knew my history, where I could disappear into anonymity. I teach high school biology now. I stand in front of teenagers and explain DNA replication, natural selection, the mechanisms of evolution, and I wonder sometimes if any of them can sense the irony. I know things about evolution that would rewrite their textbooks. I have seen evidence that would revolutionize our understanding of human history, and I can never tell them. The monitoring continues. Every 6 months, I receive a visit from someone who identifies themselves as a federal auditor conducting a routine compliance check. They ask questions about my activities, my communications, my mental state. They remind me in careful, neutral language of the consequences of disclosure. They leave, and I spend the next several weeks looking over my shoulder. I am 61 years old. My heart is failing, the doctors say. Too much stress over too many years. I do not have much time left, probably 5 years at most. But I have this account. I have the truth, or as much of it as I can safely tell. The creatures are real. They are out there in the deep forests, watching and waiting. They have been there longer than our civilization, and they will keep taking people until we acknowledge what we have known for decades. Be careful in the wilderness, trust your instincts, and remember the ones who never came home. This is Dr. Nathan Price. This is my testimony. This is my truth. And now it belongs to you. End Part 2. Total script complete, approximately 60,000 characters. There is one more thing I need to tell you before I end this account. One more piece of the story that I have carried alone for too long. 6 months after I signed the agreement, after I had moved to Vermont and started trying to rebuild some semblance of a normal life, I received a package in the mail. There was no return address, no postmark that indicated where it had originated. Inside was a single photograph and a handwritten note. The photograph showed the cave entrance that Brennan and Ruth and I had discovered in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest. But it was different now. The entrance had been sealed with concrete professional work that must have taken days to complete. Tons of material poured into the mountainside to ensure that no one would ever enter that chamber again. The bones were still in there. The belongings of 200 victims were still in there. The evidence that could have given closure to 200 families was now buried forever under feet of hardened cement. The note was brief. 3 sentences in handwriting I did not recognize. The site has been secured. The evidence has been contained. Thank you for your cooperation. I burned the note and the photograph that same day. I stood in my backyard in Vermont, watching the flames consume the last physical evidence of what I had discovered, and I felt something inside me die. Not hope exactly, I had lost that long before. Something more fundamental, the belief that what I did mattered, the conviction that truth, pursued with enough dedication, would eventually prevail. The truth had not prevailed. The truth had been buried under concrete, just like the bones of the people who had died, because they ventured too far into the wrong forest. I have thought often about those bones since then, about the people they belonged to. I knew some of their names from the belongings we found, the identification cards and journals and personal effects that told fragments of their stories. William Carver, the prospector who disappeared in 1964. Sarah Mitchell, the college student whose phone captured images of something following her through the trees. The Henderson family, Ruth's son and daughter-in-law and granddaughter, who had simply wanted to spend a day hiking together. They deserved better than to be forgotten. They deserved better than to have their deaths covered up, their families lied to, their stories erased from history. But the system that protects the secret cares nothing for individual tragedies. It cares only about maintaining the equilibrium, preserving the illusion of safety that allows people to keep visiting the wilderness without understanding the risk they are taking. I wonder sometimes what the creatures think of all this. They are intelligent, we know that much. They have language, culture, social organization. They must understand, on some level, that the humans they take have families, communities, people who will miss them. Do they care? Do they experience anything like remorse or guilt? Or are we simply prey to them? Resources to be harvested, threats to be eliminated? I do not know. I probably never will. But I find myself hoping, irrationally, that there is more to them than predation. That somewhere in those deep forests around fires we cannot see, they tell stories about the strange, hairless creatures who keep encroaching on their territory. That they wonder about us the same way we wonder about them. It does not change anything. They are still taking people. The government is still covering it up. Families are still being destroyed by secrets they will never be allowed to know. But the thought that they might be more than monsters, more than mindless predators, gives me some small comfort in the dark hours when sleep will not come. I am tired now, tired of carrying this weight, tired of watching the numbers climb year after year and being unable to say anything, tired of living half a life, unable to connect fully with anyone because of the secrets I am forced to keep. This account is my attempt to set down the burden, to transfer the weight to whoever reads these words. I cannot give you the evidence that was destroyed. I cannot point you to files that have been classified beyond any civilian's reach. I can only tell you what I saw, what I learned, what I was forced to accept. The creatures are real. The disappearances are real. The cover-up is real. What you do with that information is up to you. If you have lost someone to the wilderness, if you have spent years wondering what really happened to a loved one who vanished without explanation, I am sorry. I cannot give you the specific answers you deserve. I can only tell you that your suspicions were probably correct. Something did happen. Something that was covered up, dismissed, buried under layers of official denial. Your grief is valid. Your questions were legitimate. You were not crazy for believing that the official explanation did not add up. If you are planning a trip into the wilderness, be careful. Stay on marked trails. Travel in groups. Make noise. Do not venture into areas that feel wrong. Places where the forest goes too quiet, where you feel eyes on you even though you cannot see anything watching. Those instincts exist for a reason. Our ancestors survived by listening to them. We would do well to remember that. If you work in law enforcement or search and rescue or wildlife management, and you have seen things you cannot explain, you are not alone. There are others who know what you know, who have seen what you have seen. The official channels will not help you. They are designed to maintain silence, not discover truth. But perhaps, someday, there will be enough of us who know the truth, that the silence can no longer hold. That is my hope. That is the fragile thing I cling to as my health fails and my time runs out. That someday, the weight of accumulated evidence will become too heavy for suppression. That someday, the families will get the answers they deserve. That someday, we will face this threat openly, honestly, with the full knowledge and resources of our civilization, instead of sacrificing a few hundred people each year to maintain an equilibrium that benefits everyone except the victims. I do not expect to live to see that day, but perhaps you will. My name is Dr. Nathan Price. For 23 years, I served as a senior forensic geneticist for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I discovered evidence of an unknown primate species connected to hundreds of human disappearances spanning decades. I was silenced, threatened, and broken by a system designed to maintain secrets at any cost. But I am not dead yet, and as long as I am alive, I will keep telling the truth in whatever form I can to whoever will listen. The creatures are out there. They have always been out there, and they will keep taking people until we finally acknowledge what we have known for 80 years. This is my testimony. This is my truth. This is my warning. Be careful, be vigilant, and remember the ones who never came home.